Welcome to another deep dive, everybody. Today we're going to be looking at counseling relationships.
Whoa.
We're focusing on how they're formed and what makes them work. And I've got an expert here to help us break it all down.
Absolutely. I'm excited to dig into this.
So we're working primarily with a chapter from a university course on interviewing and counseling skills. And one of the first things that stood out to me was how the material really emphasizes that these relationships are intimate. But they're not like our friendships.
Right. They're not just casual hangouts.
Right. It's not just swapping stories over coffee.
Yeah, there's a real purpose to this closeness. Think of it like a guided tour through a museum.
Oh, okay.
You and the tour guide are close, sharing that experience, but the guide's role is to illuminate the art, not share their personal collection.
I see.
The focus remains on you, the client, and your journey of self-discovery.
So there's closeness, but it's in service of a specific goal. And actually, the first visual we have really highlights this. It emphasizes how these relationships are goal-directed. But isn't every relationship in some way working towards something?
True, but in counseling, those goals are explicitly defined and collaboratively set. It's like using a compass. The client chooses the direction, the North Star they want to reach, and the counselor helps them navigate, adjusting for obstacles along the way.
So it's intentional and focused. The visual also talks about partnership. What does that look like in practice?
It's like a dance,
Okay.
where both partners are in sync, moving together toward a common goal. The counselor isn't leading or dictating steps. It's about respecting the client's expertise in their own life and working together to co-create the choreography.
Oh, I like that a lot. And of course, it shows those core counselor qualities.
Yeah.
Warmth, empathy, genuineness. It's like the counselor's providing that warm, inviting space for the client to feel safe enough to really open up.
Precisely. It's about creating a space where vulnerability is met with acceptance, not judgment. A place where they can explore their inner landscape without fear of getting lost.
And being culturally intelligent, as the visual mentions, that's key too.
Absolutely. We live in a diverse world, and counselors need to be sensitive to their clients' cultural backgrounds and values.
Yeah.
It's like being a translator,
Okay.
bridging the gap between different languages and customs to ensure clear and respectful communication.
The last point in this visual that really stood out to me is the emphasis on optimism. Now, I can understand why that's important for the client, but does the counselor need to be like super peppy all the time?
Not peppy necessarily, but maintaining a hopeful stance is crucial. It's like being a gardener. You're nurturing the seeds of possibility, believing in the client's capacity for growth, even when they might not see it themselves.
So it's about fostering that belief that change is possible even when things feel really tough. It's
Yeah.
giving the client that light at the end of the tunnel.
Precisely. It can make all the difference in the world.
Now, building this kind of relationship is obviously a delicate process. There are lots of potential pitfalls. And the source material actually lists out some common barriers. One of the first ones mentioned is personality conflict. Now, that one seems pretty straightforward, but how much does personality actually matter in counseling?
You'd be surprised how much it can impact the process. It's like trying to bake a cake with mismatched ingredients. You might technically have everything you need, but if the flavors clash, the final product won't be quite right.
So finding a counselor who's a good fit for your personality is as important as finding one who's qualified.
Absolutely. There needs to be that spark of connection, a sense of mutual understanding and trust. Otherwise, it's like trying to have a conversation with someone speaking a different language.
Okay, so this visual with these specific elements, it's almost like a blueprint for building that effective counselor-client relationship, wouldn't you say?
It really is. And like any good blueprint, it starts with a solid foundation, those core conditions. We're talking about empathy, genuineness, and unconditional positive regard. Think of these as the load-bearing walls of the relationship.
Okay, so that's the base. But what else goes into creating this structure? The visual mentions boundaries contract immediacy. There's a lot going on here.
It is multifaceted, which is why visualizing it can be so helpful. Each element plays a specific role. Boundaries, for instance, are like the fence around a property.
Okay.
They define the limits of the relationship, keeping it safe and professional.
And the contract piece. That always feels a bit formal to me. Is it really necessary to have like a written agreement for this kind of relationship?
It's not always a literal signed document, but the concept is crucial. Think of it like a treasure map.
Okay.
It outlines the shared journey, the destination, the client's goals, and the tools you'll use along the way. Therapeutic interventions.
So it's about establishing clear expectations and a roadmap for the work. And I see this is further fleshed out in the next visual we have.
Exactly. This visual is a good example of a work contract in action. It covers the long-term objectives, sessional objectives, and focus of the session. It provides structure and keeps everyone on the same page.
So if the contract is the treasure map, what exactly is the treasure? What are those long-term objectives we're aiming for?
Those are the client's ultimate goals, what they hope to achieve through counseling. It could be anything from improving their relationships to managing their anxiety to finding more fulfillment in their career.
Okay, so it's the big picture stuff.
Yeah.
And the sessional objectives, those are like the smaller milestones along the way.
Exactly. They're the stepping stones that lead to the ultimate destination. Each session should have a clear focus, a specific piece of the puzzle you're working on. And then this visual emphasizes the counselor's role in explaining their services, their expertise.
So it's like a contractor outlining the scope of work.
Yeah.
Explaining what they're good at and what they can realistically achieve.
Right. Transparency builds trust. And remember, the client always has a say in the process. It's a collaborative effort.
The source material then dives into this concept of active listening. Now, I feel like that's a term that gets thrown around a lot, but what does it actually look like in the context of counseling?
It's more than just hearing the words someone is saying. Think of it like a detective gathering clues. You're listening for the meaning behind the words, the unspoken emotions, the body language.
So you're tuning into the whole symphony, not just the melody.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Okay, this next visual we have is also incredibly interesting. It highlights how the focus of the contract can be on behaviors, feelings, or thinking patterns. Could you elaborate on what that means?
Think of it like a three-legged stool.
Okay.
Each leg represents one of those aspects: behavior, feeling, thinking. To have a stable and balanced structure, you need all three legs to be strong.
So if you only focus on changing behaviors without addressing the underlying thoughts and feelings that drive those behaviors, the change won't be lasting.
Exactly. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. You're addressing the symptom, but not the root cause.
Now, this next barrier in our visual trust issues, that seems pretty self-explanatory. If the client doesn't trust the counselor, how can they possibly open up?
You're right. Trust is essential. It's the bedrock of the relationship. Without it, it's like building a house on sand. It's bound to collapse.
So how do you build that trust, especially if the client has been hurt or betrayed in the past?
It takes time, patience, and consistency. The counselor needs to be reliable, dependable, and truly care about the client's well-being. It's like earning someone's trust by showing up for them day after day, rain or shine.
Okay, this visual, this Venn diagram, it seems to further emphasize how important that collaboration piece is for forming that trusting, open relationship, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It highlights the importance of discussing past experiences, both helpful and unhelpful, to inform the current journey. Think of it like learning from a previous traveler's map.
Okay.
You can see where the pitfalls are and plan a smoother route.
I see what you mean. And then there's that crucial piece about gathering need-to-know information. It's not just about contact details, right?
Right. It's also about understanding the client's expectations and beliefs about counseling. What have they heard? What are they hoping to get out of it? It's like getting a weather report before you set sail. You want to be prepared for the conditions you might encounter.
Right. Being prepared is key. And then, of course, there are the logistics, time, cost, location. These might seem mundane, but they create that framework for consistency and clarity, right?
Absolutely. It's like setting up the stage for a performance.
Okay.
You need the right lighting, sound, and seating arrangement to create the optimal experience.
So creating that optimal environment is key. The final elements this visual highlights are goals and feedback. Now, we've talked about goals a bit already, but what's the significance of feedback in this context?
Feedback is a two-way street. It's not just the counselor providing feedback to the client. It's also the client sharing their thoughts and feelings about the process. It's like having a GPS that adjusts the route based on real-time traffic updates.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
It helps ensure you're both on the same page and making progress towards the destination.
That makes me wonder, though, what happens when those cultural differences we talked about earlier come into play?
Yeah.
How do you navigate that in a way that feels respectful and effective?
It requires a combination of cultural humility and skillful communication. Think of it like learning a new dance style.
Okay.
You need to be open to unfamiliar steps, willing to stumble a bit, and be patient with yourself and your partner.
So it's about being willing to step outside your comfort zone and embrace the learning process.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there are multiple ways of seeing and experiencing the world and valuing those different perspectives.
Now, this next barrier the source material brings up is a big one. Cultural differences. And I know we just touched on this a bit, but I'm curious how these differences can actually manifest as barriers in the relationship. Is it just about language, or is there more to it?
It's so much more than language. Think of it like two ships navigating different currents. You might be heading in the same general direction, but if you don't account for those currents, you could easily drift apart.
So it's about being aware of those underlying cultural forces that might be shaping the client's perspectives and behaviors.
Absolutely. It's about understanding their values, their beliefs, their worldview. It's about recognizing that what might seem normal or logical to you might not be the same for them.
So it's about empathy and perspective taking.
Exactly. It's about meeting the client where they are culturally and emotionally. It's about bridging that gap with understanding and respect.
And then we have poor communication as a barrier. I guess that's pretty obvious. But I'm curious how this differs from the cultural differences we were just discussing.
You're right, there's some overlap.
Yeah.
But poor communication can exist even when people share the same cultural background. Think of it like a game of telephone.
Oh, nope.
The message can get distorted along the way if you're not careful.
So it's about clarity, active listening, and making sure you're both on the same page.
Precisely. Counselors need to be skilled communicators, able to convey empathy and understanding and be attuned to both verbal and nonverbal cues.
Okay. This visual highlighting the different elements of a relationship contract, it kind of reminds me of something you might see hanging in a lawyer's office. It's quite structured.
Well, remember, contracts and counseling aren't about being rigid or legalistic. They're about creating a framework for a healthy and productive relationship.
Okay, but this visual does have a lot of components. It mentions purpose goals, expectations, confidentiality, time, place, cost, even what-if scenarios. Isn't that a bit overwhelming?
It might seem like a lot, but think of it like building a house.
Oh,
You need a blueprint, right? You need to know what you're building, what materials you'll use, and how much it will cost.
So the contract is like a blueprint for the therapeutic journey. It helps create a clear and shared understanding of what to expect.
Precisely. And by addressing those what-if scenarios in advance, like what if you have to miss a session, or what if you're not making progress, you're essentially creating a contingency plan.
It's like packing a first aid kit for your emotional journey. You might not need everything in it, but it's good to be prepared.
That's a great way to put it. And don't forget that element of confidentiality, which is absolutely essential in a counseling relationship. Clients need to feel safe knowing that what they share won't be divulged.
It's like a vault where they can store their most private thoughts and feelings, knowing they'll be protected.
Exactly. Confidentiality is a cornerstone of trust.
Okay, I'm curious about the process method element in this visual. Does that refer to the specific therapeutic techniques the counselor will use?
Yes, it can. But it's broader than that. It's about outlining how you'll work together, what the sessions will look like, and what role each person will play. For instance, some counselors are very structured while others are more flexible.
So it's about setting clear expectations for how the therapeutic dance will unfold.
Precisely. And remember, contracts should be collaborative. The client's input is essential in shaping the process and ensuring it aligns with their needs and preferences.
Okay, this visual outlining the three types of contracts really brings home the idea that contracts are not just about paperwork. They're about building a framework for a healthy and productive relationship.
That's a key takeaway. The visual represents three different but interconnected aspects of contract work: relationship work and anticipatory.
It's like a three-legged stool. You
Yeah.
need all three legs to provide stability and support.
I love that analogy. The relationship contract focuses on the how of the relationship, how you'll work together, how you'll communicate, how you'll handle challenges.
So it's like setting the ground rules for a respectful and collaborative partnership.
Exactly. Then you have the work contract, which focuses on the what of the work, the specific goals, objectives, and tasks you'll be tackling.
It's like creating a shared to-do list for the journey.
Yes. And finally, you have the anticipatory contract, which is all about looking ahead, anticipating potential challenges, and developing strategies for navigating them.
It's like packing a survival kit for your emotional journey. You might not need everything in it, but it's good to be prepared.
That's a great way to put it. So as you can see, contracts are multifaceted and play a vital role in shaping the counseling relationship. They're not just about legal formalities. They're about building trust, fostering collaboration, and setting the stage for success. Absolutely.
Okay, this next barrier listed in the material is one that I always find a bit tricky. Prior negative experiences. It makes sense that if someone had a bad experience with counseling before, they'd be hesitant to try again. But how do you, as a counselor, overcome that baggage?
It's like encountering a wary animal. You can't force them to trust you. You have to earn it through patience and gentle consistency. Acknowledge the past hurt, validate their feelings, and create a new experience that slowly rebuilds their faith in the process.
So it's about proving through actions that this time will be different.
Mhm.
And I see this next visual we have really emphasizes that counselors need to be prepared for this.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of a trauma-informed approach, especially when working with young people.
I'm curious, what exactly does it mean to be trauma-informed? It's a term that gets thrown around a lot these days, but I'm not always sure what it looks like in practice.
Think of it like walking through a forest where, there might be hidden traps.
Okay.
You're cautious, observant, and respectful of the potential dangers. In a trauma-informed approach, you recognize that past trauma can have a profound impact on a person's behavior. So you proceed with sensitivity and awareness.
So it's about being mindful of potential triggers and creating a space where the client feels safe and in control. That makes a lot of sense, especially when working with youth.
Exactly. And the visual also reminds us that expecting trust issues is key. Young people who've been let down or betrayed by adults in the past might have a hard time opening up.
That's understandable. How do you as a counselor navigate that?
It's like tending a delicate plant. You provide the right conditions, warmth, consistency, gentle support, and allow the trust to grow organically. You can't force it.
Patience is key. Now, this visual reminds us that language barriers can also pose a challenge. That seems pretty straightforward. If you can't understand each other, how can you build a relationship?
It's more nuanced than just speaking different languages. Even when using the same language, our words can have different meanings, different connotations based on our cultural backgrounds and personal experiences.
So it's like trying to read a map drawn in a foreign language. The symbols might look familiar, but without understanding the key, you could easily get lost.
Exactly. It requires the counselor to be incredibly mindful of their language, to avoid jargon and technical terms, and to constantly check for understanding. It's about slowing down, being patient, and ensuring that both parties are truly speaking the same language.
And then, of course, we have transference and countertransference, a topic we touched on earlier. It's fascinating, really, how our past relationships can so easily sneak into our present interactions.
It's like carrying a hidden script that we're unknowingly playing out in our interactions. And in the counseling relationship, this can create all sorts of complications.
So how do you, as a counselor, recognize when this is happening and prevent it from derailing the work?
It takes a high level of self-awareness and ongoing supervision. Think of it like checking your blind spots when you're driving. You need someone outside of the car to help you see what you might be missing.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit and talk about this concept of immediacy, which the source material emphasizes as crucial for building and sustaining relationships. It sounds like being present, but is there more to it than that?
It's like having a built-in radar system that picks up on subtle shifts in the emotional atmosphere. It's about noticing those unspoken tensions, those awkward silences, those moments where something feels off.
So it's not just about being present physically, but also emotionally attuned to the client.
Precisely. It's about being willing to pause, acknowledge what's happening in the moment, and address it directly. It's like saying, hey, I noticed there's an elephant in the room. Shall we talk about it?
And that's how you build trust, by addressing those awkward moments head on, instead of pretending they don't exist. And this visual we have further breaks down immediacy as a tool for troubleshooting.
Yes, this visual really emphasizes the importance of using immediacy throughout the therapeutic process, not just in crisis situations.
So if a client suddenly becomes withdrawn or defensive, the counselor might use immediacy to say, I'm noticing a shift in your energy. Is there something you're feeling right now that we need to address?
Exactly. It's about bringing those unspoken feelings to the surface and creating a space for honest dialogue.
Okay, this next visual is interesting. It shows Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which isn't something I'd immediately associate with counseling. It's more about individual needs.
It is. But in the context of counselor self-disclosure, it's a reminder that counselors have needs too. And sometimes those needs might conflict with the client's needs.
So a counselor who's feeling burnt out or overwhelmed might be tempted to share their own problems with the client, even if it's not in the client's best interest.
Exactly. And that's where the ethical dilemmas come in. The visual shows how our needs progress from basic survival needs at the bottom to self-actualization at the top.
So the idea is that counselors should have their own needs met, at least to a reasonable degree, before they can effectively attend to their clients' needs.
Precisely. If a counselor is struggling to meet their own basic needs for safety, security, or belonging, they might not have the emotional bandwidth to provide effective support to others.
That makes sense. It's like trying to pour from an empty cup. You can't give what you don't have.
Exactly. And that's why self-care is crucial for any helping professional.
And the source material really dives into the complexities of counselor self-disclosure, outlining both the benefits and the risks.
It is a double-edged sword. On one hand, sharing something personal can create a sense of connection and normalize the client's experience.
So if a client is struggling with shame or guilt, a counselor might choose to share a brief, relevant anecdote about a time they made a mistake, to show that they're human too.
Exactly. It's about conveying the message that, hey, we're all imperfect, we all make mistakes, you're not alone in this. But on the other hand, self-disclosure can also backfire. It can shift the focus away from the client, create a sense of burden, or even blur the boundaries of the relationship.
So it's a delicate balance. And it seems like this next visual we have really tries to lay out some guidelines for navigating that balance, right?
It does. It emphasizes 4 key principles. Focus on the client's needs, exercise choice and flexibility, be mindful of the moment, and prioritize the work.
So the counselor should always be asking themselves, is this self-disclosure in the best interest of the client?
Absolutely. It's not about meeting the counselor's needs or using the client as a sounding board.
And the idea of exercising choice and flexibility means that the counselor shouldn't feel obligated to self-disclose just because a client asks a personal question.
Exactly. The counselor has the right to decline to answer a question if it feels inappropriate or if it would shift the focus away from the client's needs.
And being mindful of the moment means that self-disclosure should always be relevant to the current conversation and a client's therapeutic goals.
Precisely. It shouldn't feel random or out of place.
Okay.
And lastly, the visual reminds us to prioritize the work. So self-disclosure should always serve the purpose of facilitating the client's growth and healing, not the counselor's.
Okay. So it's about remembering who's in the driver's seat, so to speak.
Exactly.
This next visual really captures the essence of those benefits and risks of counselor self-disclosure, wouldn't you say?
I think it does a great job. On the plus side, self-disclosure can create warmth, normalize feelings, model openness, and show that the counselor is a fellow human being, not some distant authority figure. But as we've discussed, it also has its downsides.
Like shifting the focus, creating a sense of burden, and potentially blurring boundaries.
Exactly. It's a powerful tool that should be used with caution and careful consideration.
Now, this next section of the material dives into something really important: engaging diverse populations, specifically working with youth and seniors. What considerations do counselors need to keep in mind when working with these groups?
There are unique challenges and rewards that come with working with each population. With youth, for instance, establishing clear boundaries is paramount.
That makes sense. Kids and teens might not always understand the professional boundaries of the relationship.
Exactly. And this visual we have really highlights that by saying, communicate you are not their friend or parent. It's important to convey that while you care about their well-being, you're not their buddy or their substitute parent. You have a different role to play.
Okay, so setting those clear boundaries is key. And what about being aware of the limits of confidentiality? That seems particularly important with younger clients.
Absolutely. Counselors have a legal and ethical obligation to report suspected abuse or neglect. And it's important to explain those limits to young clients in a way that they understand. This visual with the specific language on it really makes it clear for the counselor.
So transparency is key. And this visual also mentions considering a possible history of abuse. Why is that so crucial when working with young people?
Because trauma can have a profound impact on a child's development and can manifest in a variety of ways. Counselors need to be trauma-informed and approach young clients with sensitivity and understanding.
Can you explain a little more about what a trauma-informed approach looks like in practice?
Think of it like entering a room where you know someone has been injured.
Okay.
You move carefully, speak softly, and avoid any sudden movements that might startle or scare them.
So you're creating a space where the client feels safe and in control. And the visual also emphasizes the importance of anticipating trust issues.
Exactly. Young people who have been let down or betrayed by adults in the past might have a hard time opening up. It takes time and patience to build that trust.
It's like earning the trust of a stray animal. You can't force it. You have to let them come to you at their own pace. This next visual highlights the specific considerations for working with older adults, and it really emphasizes the richness of their life experiences.
It does. Seniors often have a wealth of stories and wisdom to share. It's important for counselors to approach them with humility and a willingness to learn from their experiences.
The visual encourages counselors to discuss age differences openly. Why is that important?
Because age can create a power dynamic in the counseling relationship. Counselors need to be mindful of their own age and how it might be perceived by older clients.
So a younger counselor might need to work harder to establish credibility and rapport with an older client.
That's a possibility. It's important to be respectful, humble, and open to learning from the client's experiences.
And of course, the visual also reminds us to be aware of potential transference and countertransference issues, which can be particularly salient when working with seniors, right? Because our own experiences with our parents or grandparents can easily seep into those relationships. So self-awareness is key. And finally, the visual encourages counselors to examine their own assumptions about aging.
Yes, we all have preconceived notions about what it means to be old, and those biases can unconsciously influence our interactions. It's important to challenge those assumptions and see each client as an individual regardless of their age.
So it's about recognizing that older adults are not a monolithic group. They have diverse needs, experiences, and perspectives, just like any other population.
Exactly. It's about honoring their individuality and treating them with the same respect and dignity that we would any other client.
Yes.
It's about honoring their individuality and treating them with that same respect and dignity we would any other client.
Well, this deep dive into the nuances of the counselor-client relationship has been incredibly insightful.
It's such a foundational topic, and yet there's always more to learn.
Absolutely. We've covered so much ground, from those core conditions that form the bedrock of the relationship to navigating barriers like cultural differences and trust issues. We even touched on the complexities of counselor self-disclosure, which, let me tell you, is a topic that could have its own deep dive.
It certainly could.
But before we wrap up, we have some supplementary material that I wanted to touch on. It focuses on these 5 key questions that every counselor should ask their client. At first glance, they seem pretty basic, but I have a feeling there's more to them than meets the eye.
You're right. These questions might seem simple, but they're incredibly powerful tools for gathering information, building rapport, and guiding the therapeutic process. Think of them as a framework for understanding the client's world.
Okay, I'm ready to have my mind blown. So the first question is, who is involved?
Yeah.
Seems pretty straightforward. But what's the deeper meaning here?
It's about understanding the client's social network, their ecosystem. Who are the key players in their life? Who supports them? Who might be contributing to the problem? It's like creating a map of the client's relationships, highlighting both the sources of support and the potential sources of stress.
So it's not just about identifying the client's immediate family, but also their broader social circle, their work colleagues, their friends, their community.
Exactly. It helps the counselor get a holistic view of the client's life and identify any potential resources or challenges that might be influencing their well-being.
The next question is, what happened? Again, seems pretty basic, but I'm sensing there's more to it.
There is. It's crucial to approach this question with empathy and active listening. This is the client's opportunity to share their story, their experience, their pain. It's not about rushing them or interrupting them with their own interpretations. It's about creating that safe space for them to open up without feeling judged or misunderstood.
So it's like holding a delicate object, treating their story with care and reverence.
That's a beautiful analogy.
And then we have, when did this happen? Why is understanding the timeline important?
Well, I imagine it helps the counselor see patterns, identify triggers, and maybe even connect the dots between past experiences and present challenges.
Okay.
Precisely. It's like piecing together a puzzle, looking for clues and connections that might not be immediately obvious. It can also help the counselor understand the historical context of the problem and identify any potential root causes that might be lurking beneath the surface.
Okay, the fourth question is, where did this happen? I can see how location could be relevant. Certain places or environments might trigger certain feelings or behaviors, right?
Exactly. Understanding the context in which the problem occurs can provide valuable insights. Was it at home, at work, in a social setting? Each location carries its own set of associations and potential triggers.
And finally, the most future-oriented question, what's next?
This is where we shift from understanding the problem to envisioning solutions. What does the client want to achieve? What are their hopes for the future? It's about empowering them to take ownership of their journey and start painting a picture of a brighter tomorrow.
So it's like turning the page and starting a new chapter, focusing on possibilities rather than limitations.
Exactly. It's about moving from what's wrong to what's possible. And these 5 questions woven together create a tapestry of understanding, a roadmap for the therapeutic journey ahead.
I love that. These questions are deceptively simple, yet incredibly powerful. They provide a framework for empathy, insight, and growth.
They do. And they remind us that effective counseling is as much about asking the right questions as it is about providing the right answers.
Well, this deep dive has been a journey of discovery, uncovering the hidden complexities and profound beauty of the counselor-client relationship. A huge thank you to you, our expert, for sharing your wisdom and insights today.
It's been a pleasure. I always enjoy exploring this topic.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this exploration. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. Remember, the principles we've discussed today aren't just for therapists. They're for anyone who wants to build deeper, more meaningful connections in their lives. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep those conversations flowing.